Hi, welcome back to Finding Me. I'm your host, Damian Smith. Today's episode is one that hits a little close to home because it's one of my stories. Now, this story is one of many that I'll be sharing throughout this docuseries. Today, I present to you Speaking to Deaf Ears. Now, like always, with this series, sometimes you might hear some language that you might not find favorable. But, again, these are stories coming from people sharing their truth. And with that, we just want to make sure that they can speak freely. So with that being said, here is Speaking to Deaf Ears. Hi, my name is Damian Smith, and this is my story of finding me. My story starts when I was about 7 years old. And 7, 9, and 15, these are the 3 years I'm going to cover in my life and the effects of it now on me to this very day. When I was 7 years old, I was one of those kids where I got up early in the morning, watched cartoons, ate cereal, got dressed, always was outside, especially in the summertime, riding my bike, playing with family, playing with my cousins and everything. Growing up, this was around the 80s, lived in a very close-knit family where a lot of us lived on the same block, spent a lot of time together as kids. And just like any close-knit family like that, as time goes on, especially if the matriarch or patriarch of the family passes, usually the family relationships and bonds are pretty much weakened. But anyway, so 7 years old, my grandfather was a brick mason, and it was nothing for us to, from time to time, to be on jobs with him. He would show us how to mix concrete and everything. He didn't care about how old, how young you were. You had to do it right, and he put us to work. My grandmother was, she pretty much held the household down. She cooked for the family. She cooked for not only just my grandfather, but us as the kids. In the summertime, we would go over there and stay with them as much as possible. Go on trips back and forth to Apple Valley, just to the campgrounds up in Michigan. Just a lot of good times were had then. It was also the first time that I experienced being molested by a family member. And like I said, I was 7 years old, and the first time was actually by a male. And when it took place in my grandmother's basement. And I was told not to tell, or he would hurt me. And this went on for a brief period of time. And finally, I knew something wasn't right about it because of the way things would take place when usually we were left alone with him. He would take me down to the basement, and that's where I was molested. I remember like yesterday telling my mother about it, and it was a Friday night. And at this time, we lived on like 23rd and Adams, and my grandmother lived on the west side of town on 17th and Rutledge. And I remember my mom calling my grandmother, and I remember laying on the floor after telling her, and thinking like things were going to change, but nothing ever happened. And the reason why I say this is not to put my mom on blast or anything like that. I believe that she did the best she could in spite of. And her going to my grandmother with it, because it took place at my grandmother's house, it was like, well, what takes place from here? But to give you a little background, the most interesting thing about my grandmother at that time, it was almost like there was this big kept secret about whatever took place inside our household. It was not to be told outside the household. So if somebody had money, you weren't supposed to tell anybody that. If anything good or bad happened in the house, it wasn't up to you, especially as a child, to share that information with anybody. And the following week, because we would always be around my grandparents' house, we were back together in the same house. And what happened was my grandfather picked us up, and I don't believe my grandfather ever knew, because if he did know, that I think he would have done something about it, because just the type of man he was. My cousin he was one of those individuals where he was always in and out of trouble. always in and out of trouble. And this one particular time we were together, and he had said something to me about the fact that I told, and he had a gun. And we were in my grandfather's truck, and he put it in my grandfather's glove box. And all I could think of at that time was that he was going to hurt me. And when we were riding, my grandfather made a stop. He got out, and I can still see it to this day, like clearly, trying to figure out a way to let my grandfather know something was going on. And when my grandfather got back in the vehicle, I kicked the button on the dash to release the glove box. And once it fell open, my grandfather looked over and saw the gun in there. And after that, my cousin wasn't allowed to be around us anymore. The time, flash forward 2 years later, at 9, there was a cousin of ours. It was a female, and she had been touching me inappropriately, and found out she was touching another cousin of mine that was close in age to me inappropriately, and we were discussing it, and we'd said something to someone about it, and at the time, the cousin, because she was older, they went and said something to her, said, hey, your cousins are saying that you did this, this, and this. And immediately she ran home and told her mom. And her mom basically whooped my cousin and I because we were lying on her daughter. And that's something that, it took me years to let go of. Just the feelings of resentment I harbor towards my aunt for that. So the process of us telling and getting whooped basically led to me silencing myself and not speaking on it again for many years. The next situation happened when I was 15 years old, and I was living in Nashville, Tennessee at the time, and situation happened where I was molested by a grown woman that was a family member, a friend of the family. And it was one of those things of where my family came down to visit, and me at that time, I can honestly say, because of what had happened in my past, it led me to being a quote-unquote managed child, where I would say inappropriate things to adults, and would, talk to women like I had a chance at the age of 15, even younger. But it was one of those things of where I remember we were all sitting around talking, laughing and playing, joking around and everything that night. And everybody pretty much it was like people just fell out. Somebody sleeping on the couch. It was like 4 people sleeping on the couch bed, cousin sleeping on the floor and everything. And I just wake up. I remember waking up and being inside of this woman. And at 15, the thing that's sad about it is, part of it is it's almost like you think that, well, this is supposed to happen because this is a grown woman, for one, and like you're the man. And it's almost like taken seriously because I'm a boy and this is happening from a grown woman. But again, because of the previous 2 incidents that happened in my life, I pretty much silenced myself and didn't speak on it to my mom. And a couple of adults that I did share it with were males, and it was almost like a pat on the back type of thing. The one thing I do remember that I had problems with still up until recently was comments and things that she made about my size and everything like that. It wasn't a one-time thing. The next day, something happened in another part of the house where pretty much we were left in a room alone. And after that happened, I told a cousin that was close in age to me, and it was like, man, why are you complaining? Why like that's a good thing. So I didn't think much of it, and I just basically threw it to the side. It wasn't until I had my kids, and when my son was born, actually my oldest daughter and my son, when they were born, it gave me a new outlook on life and especially when it came down to the responsibility of raising my kids. It's one of those things where I was very guarded about them actually being able to spend the night over other people's homes, their interaction with males in particular and females actually. Um, it even made me so guarded to the point where I wouldn't even do things like hug and embrace my kids, give them kisses, because in the back of my mind, I thought that you're told that people that molest end up becoming molesters. And it was something I just didn't want for them at all. Just the pain that it brought, just all the problems. I think a lot of times when it comes down to young men, boys being molested, especially if it's somebody by the opposite sex, the thought process is, oh, they're going to be okay, so you don't have to get them help. And I'm going to be honest with you, it warps you. It really does. It gives you a warm sense of for one, how intimacy is supposed to be, how you're supposed to express yourself sexually, and and under what grounds you're supposed to basically express yourself sexually. Um, it wasn't until a cousin of mine talked to me one day about the fact that his kids came to me and told me good night, and I just pretty much just like gave him a high five and sent them on their way. And my cousin was like, "No, man, you give them a hug. It's okay to give your kids a hug. There's nothing wrong with it." But it was one of those things for me. It's like, again, I didn't want to be, or I didn't want them to experience what I went through, and at that time it was just in my mind any form of intimacy or embrace. I felt like they would feel what I felt. The one thing that comes to mind, even in doing this docu-series and putting this all together and me sharing this part of my life, is I want to share the importance for parents to pay attention and to listen. No matter how minor you think your child's accusations or stories are, it's nothing wrong with investigating to 100%, and it's nothing wrong with getting your kids help. I'm sitting here at 43, and I thank God that I never wrestled with anything as far as, questions about my sexuality or anything like that. But I know for a fact that it had impact on the relationships that I had been in. That's one of the reasons why I've worked with kids for so long, and actually desired to work with kids, because I wanted to make sure that they were protected and they were heard. The individuals that did what they did to me, I think part of me, my heart went out to them because of the fact that I believe it's learned behavior. The cousin that molested me at the age of 7 actually reached out to me back in 2006 via mail and apologized. And for the longest, I didn't accept the apology. And the reason for that was because he never said what he did. He just made a blanket ass statement apologizing for what had been done. And I felt like that's not owning your shit. I'm a firm believer in, if you do something wrong to somebody, you specifically state what you did wrong in your apology. But I thank God that time has gone and moved on from that, and I've grown to see that forgiveness is something that's very important for our growth. Especially those that have been victimized, those that have gone through major things. It's not on that individual. It's more or less, it's on me, so I can have healthy relationships, so I can be healthy and move forward. Again, parents, do your due diligence, see things all the way through. One of the things that I know for a fact, and especially in minority communities, a lot of times the predator is someone that we know, someone that's close, someone that's near and dear to the family. It could be that family friend, it could be that family member. As parents, uncles, aunts, grandparents, our job is to protect our kids, protect our youth, protect our future. It's one of those things of where, at any cost. So that means if I lose ties with my family, I have to lose those ties because I'm protecting my child. Some might be watching and saying, man, that's something that's hard to do, but the reality of it is, when you're raising a kid that's broken, and you reach for that relationship one day and it's not there because you didn't do your part, who can you blame but yourself? For the family members that, did what they could, or it was one of those things where for my health's sake I forgave and moved on. My mom and I, we've talked about it and, discussed it at length, and it was hard for me to have that necessary conversation to move forward in our relationship. I know for a fact that, again, because of the relationship of the family, the bonds aren't there anymore. It makes it hard to move forward and actually become family all again, because you have these things that have taken place and no one has actually spoken out and said, hey, you didn't protect me in this situation. And it's okay to own up to your mistakes. Nobody's perfect. If you have experienced something like this, I tell anybody, seek professional help if possible, to get it out there, to have the necessary conversations. I'm glad that the current movements that are taking place, whether it's the Me Too movement or the Time's Up movement, have progressed the way they have, because now it gives a voice to the voiceless. It gives individuals where in the past they would have been blamed for what happened to them, some consideration now. So I just say that, to all of you all that are watching this, that if you've experienced it, if you have suspicions that someone is going through something like this, get the professional help that you need or they need. Do what you can to make sure that you protect those individuals. Nobody's perfect. I realize that. But even for those individuals that did it to me, they needed help. Now, the one individual was passed and gone on. But again, it was one of those things where I had to forgive and for my sake. As a father, again, it helped me in how I basically raised my kids, and just some of the things that they just weren't allowed around. My involvement was a little bit more, even more so, because of the fact that this had taken place. But I thank God that I don't view myself as a victim anymore. It's one of those things where you survive it, and your job is to make sure that you reach back and help those that could possibly be in that situation. That's why I created this, just as a sounding board for those that have gone through, and at the same time they can reach back and help those that are coming behind along. So I want to thank you for watching my story of finding me.